All right. Good afternoon. Let's go ahead and get started for today.
Afternoon.
Welcome back. I hope that you've been having a good second week so far. For those of you who had the opportunity to go to the career fair this morning, how was that? Anybody who went this morning, or sounds like a lot of folks had classes? Oh yeah, you and Isaac, how'd it go? It was pretty good. Awesome. Yeah, I noticed coming up to campus today, there were a lot of cars parked up there, and it seemed like there was pretty good attendance. So awesome. Glad to have you all here. So let's go ahead and get started for today. As a quick recap, we went over the symbolic interaction theory last class. I'm going to try to sound a little bit less loud so I'm not compensating as much for projecting, so bear with me. We also spent some time going over the annotated bibliography assignment, due not this Sunday, but the following Sunday, and basically explored our first theory. So for those of you that were here last class, I'll ask for a volunteer to fill in the blank here for a quick review. Core idea of SIT, symbolic interaction theory, is blank, which refers to fairly stable beliefs that we have about ourselves. What is this right here? Yes, awesome job. So self-concept, right? A big idea here with this theory is that we experience self-concept, who we believe ourselves to be through our interactions. Also, things such as the looking glass self or how others perceive us. So I'll do a little like recap, like ungraded quiz, just to get us thinking about and refreshing on the previous class. Remember that the annotated bibliography is available on Canvas for you to work on and to start finding articles that could connect to theories. For Friday, I'm going to distribute a sign-up sheet for a short presentation you'll do in future classes in the term. So just know that that's coming up, and I'll ask you to indicate your availability. There'll be a presentation later in the class where I'm asking you to basically talk about why you see a theory in the class is relevant, significant to your own lives. So stay tuned for the sign-up times for Friday. Any questions on anything from last class or anything about the course in general before we get started? Sweet. So for today, we are looking at uncertainty reduction theory, or URT. If you've taken a class like interpersonal communication, you've probably heard of this theory before, but we'll use time today to go into it in a lot more detail and explore why it matters to us. We'll also look at its application and use in a variety of mediated contexts. So to get us started in a somewhat different way for this class, what I want you to do is to take some time to find somebody else in the class that you don't already know. So you might look around the room, find somebody that you're not sitting next to just take a few minutes to chat with. And some of the things that you could share or disclose as you're getting to know and talking with that person might include what brought you to EOU, what other classes you might be taking, what kind of things you like to do on campus or things that you're involved in, and what some of your hobbies are as well. So I encourage you to find somebody maybe on the other side of the room or not sitting super close to you to talk with for just a few minutes. You don't need to write anything down. Just take some time to have a brief conversation.
I know her name. So my name is Jake. Coming to you but mainly it was I like to and like my favorite is I know about yeah. I work for a house.
A couple more minutes for your conversation.
Great. Did you really? I heard it was good. Have you been dressed up? Once I finished
Go ahead and wrap up your conversation. Seems like people made some new friends, which is awesome. So point out why we did this in just a second, but you could probably start to guess. What I want you to do now, since you have this conversation fresh in your head, is you can either write or type this and hang on to it because I won't be asking you to turn it in until the end. Is just to take some time to think about what it was like to talk to somebody that you really didn't know very well. What was that experience like for you? Maybe you felt anxious, maybe you felt comfortable because you were both students in the same class. Maybe it was a little bit awkward at first, but it opened up and became more comfortable over time. What did that experience feel like? And then secondarily, what stood out to you about the communication that you had with your partner? You might think about both the verbal and nonverbal communication that you had. You might think about the ways that you listened or used feedback with that person to show that you understood what was happening. Just take some time to note some of the things that stood out to you. Take about 2 more minutes on this. Finish what you're writing at the moment and hang on to this sheet for later. I'd like to hear from a couple folks as to what they wrote or shared about their experience here in talking with somebody that they didn't know super well. Is there anybody that is especially interested in sharing? Yeah, what about you?
I said I noticed it was when you found the common ground, it was kind of easier to naturally just talk to someone.
Yeah.
Less forced.
Yeah, that's a really good point, right? We'll talk about that in just a minute, but we feel a lot more comfort when we find similarity or just able to figure out where that common ground is. Presley, what about you?
I just said that like we were both athletes, so it was like nice to see that like our schedules are both busy and like we don't have a lot of time for other activities like outside of like sports. So.
Right. So finding similarities not only helps to reduce awkwardness, it ensures that you and the other person kind of understand a lot about each other. Okay, you're an athlete, so you also understand having a busy schedule and not having a lot of time for hobbies, right? Sometimes finding similarities helps us make a lot of shortcuts in figuring out and getting to know the personalities of other people. So these are some good points. And again, as I was noticing conversation, it seemed like over time, some of the nonverbal communication felt more open to. You all were kind of gesturing a little bit more. You seemed like more physically close. Some people were even like doing a handshake or a hug at the end of the conversation. So it was interesting to just sort of trace without even hearing every conversation that's happening. That'd be weird. How you all were choosing to express yourselves non-verbally, even though it was probably not intentional. So some really interesting things that kind of stood out here that connect really well to uncertainty reduction theory that we'll be looking at for today. So URT is an exploration of how we try to reduce the uncertainty or ambiguity that we experience in our own lives. How many people have heard of the term or concept of catfishing? Several of you, right? So catfishing is a term that's emerged to describe the way that people in online communication will present like a false or distorted version of themselves and trick somebody else into thinking that they're talking to somebody totally different. For instance, there might be somebody who portrays themselves as a 21-year-old woman who's a high school or is a college cheerleader, right? And is in actuality like a 55-year-old man, right? So the use of uncertainty reduction theory is present in things like catfishing. Catfishing was actually adapted to like a movie and a TV show in which the hosts look at people who are a little bit uneasy or unsure of the person they met online actually being who they say they are. And it's a whole thing where they have these shocking discoveries and revelations. There's some recent work on this too. I binge watched through Bad Vegan on Netflix, which is a story about a restaurant owner who was swindled out of millions of dollars because of this kind of fraudulent type of person. Tinder Swindler on Netflix is a similar type of character who likes to exploit monetarily other people. So there's a lot of cases of fraud, of people not being who they say they are. And I think for us, being aware of some of those scams and pranks, right? We are especially anxious about how we disclose and choose to get to know other people online, right? If we haven't met a person face to face, we have a lot of questions about whether or not that person is who they claim to be. And we do communication practices in an effort to navigate and manage that uncertainty and make sure that we trust other people, right? So some examples here of uncertainty reduction theory in action. The core principle, right, and guiding idea behind URT, and this is an area, again, when you're thinking about and potentially pushing back against this theory, it's worthwhile to think about, is that humans don't like ambiguity. We don't like uncertainty. That is, if we are talking or getting to know somebody, we don't like the idea that they could be a billion different ways, the conversation could go a billion different directions. We like patterns, we like regularity, maybe we like people that are fun and a little bit different, but we like to know what we're getting into. If, for instance, you're spending the weekend with a good friend to unwind, maybe go out on a hike or do something fun, you like to know your friend well enough to know how that's going to go, right? So because uncertainty can be an emotionally and incredibly draining experience, we like the idea of reducing it whenever possible. So this takes a socio-psychological approach, right? Examining how people behave in our relationships. Like last theory and like Friday's theory, it's intra and interpersonal communication between ourselves and other people. And it takes a positivistic or empirical approach, which means that it's very much considered with these objective axioms or laws that are meant to explain how we reduce and manage uncertainty in our own lives, which we'll get to in just a minute. One way of thinking about URT, right, is the idea of stranger danger. From a very young age, many of us are told not to have conversations with or to, expose too much about ourselves to strangers and people that we don't know or trust. That it's through the process of getting to know people, learning about them, figuring out if they're safe to spend time with, that we start to feel more comfortable and safe. Obviously, as adults, that experience looks a little bit different for us, but especially when we're younger, we're navigating that kind of terrain, knowing the danger and risk that might come in talking to people we don't know well, right? In communication, when we experience uncertainty about who other people are or how our encounter with that person is going to go, we might feel a lot of stress, right? When I first moved here and first started out in my office, I didn't know who to expect coming and going and talking with me, sitting in the desks near me, right? So there was uncertainty there. When people meet, right, when you had the chance to talk to other folks in the class, we reduce uncertainty and enhance predictability, right? It might be, okay, we're both athletes, we have some things in common. Or it might be identifying some hobbies and things you like to do that are similar. Or it might just be that over time you get to know a person's name, you start to understand their manner of speaking, and through doing so, you do feel more comfortable about who that person is. In this way, interpersonal communication itself is uncertainty reduction. Why do we communicate? According to these authors, it's to gather data and information that helps us to know who we're talking to a little bit better, right? If we think about our closest relationships, our family, our friendships, and so on, that are really important to us, these are people that we probably know pretty well. And being like a best friend means knowing, oh, hey, you just had a really difficult exam. I'm going to go bring you a pint of ice cream, right? We like feeling like somebody understands and hears us in a specific way. Information that we have changes over time. We gather more data, figure more and more out about other people. That data helps us in our decisions. And it's possible to predict how reducing uncertainty happens in our relationships, right? That is, this theory is concerned with and identifying specific ways that we choose to reduce uncertainty. So URT matters to us. The reason we should care, right, is that explains why we do what we do. We choose to communicate to reduce uncertainty. We also experience these types of anxieties and fears in our everyday life, right? For many of us, it might be getting to know and meeting with members on a team, going on an awkward first date or meeting with somebody, right? Navigating those kinds of conversational challenges can be weird, but URT helps us to understand why we feel those anxieties and how they go away. And then lastly, as mentioned, it helps us explain how we develop comfort and trust with other people. So this theory comes from two communication scholars, the late Dr. Charles Berger and Richard Calabrese, and both of them were interested in developing this theory to understand how we manage our own anxieties in our communication. So kind of like an example, right? A lot of times the ways that we learn about who we are and how to do day-to-day tasks are through observation, right? We learn how to brush our teeth because we have a sibling or family member or friend who has helped teach us how to do that. We do observational learning a lot to navigate difficult situations, you know, going all the way back to, oh, wow, this person died eating the berries from the bush. I'm not going to eat those berries, right? Observational learning is a way that we figure out and navigate the terrain. In this way, we are researching and making sense of our conversations. That through talking with other people, we're gathering data, we're learning, and using that to enhance our communication in the future. Obviously, it doesn't always go perfectly. For instance, sometimes we are getting to know somebody and we forget their name, or we forget certain details about who that person is. But that stuff starts to smooth over as we get to know people better. Additionally, we predict or forecast possible communication options, right? If you have ever had to break not so great news to a parent or a friend or somebody else, right? You have probably rehearsed in your head how that's going to go if you know that conversation is happening, right? For instance, maybe the term has been coming to an end and you know that your parents look at your grades and you got a D in an economics class, right? And you know you have to explain and talk to your parents about why you got that grade. We're oftentimes rehearsing in our heads, developing talking points or arguments about how that's going to go. We also try to explain and make sense of our interactions, right? This theory suggests that we are using those interactions to say, okay, I learned a few things about hobbies, interests, and activities somebody else had, right? We are making sense of and gathering meaning out of those relationships. And lastly, the idea of uncertainty, right, is the idea that there are a lot of different outcomes that are likely to happen. That is, we experience a lot of uncertainty. For instance, if you were applying to college, you would apply to a bunch of different schools and you didn't know which ones you would get into, right? That would be high levels of uncertainty versus having things narrowed down and saying, okay, I know I'm going to go to U. So oftentimes that uncertainty, because each of those outcomes could happen, essentially forces us to imagine or think a little bit about the chaos of what about this outcome? What about this outcome? What about door number 5, right? We don't like that because we like to predict and know where we're headed. So uncertainty, right, as a communication process is crucial. One thing that you can think about is that uncertainty is kind of like a barrier. It's like a wall that is formed between ourselves and another person. And over getting to know somebody else, we're breaking down those walls. We might get to know somebody really well, and maybe they're not our best friend in the world. Maybe we don't have a whole lot in common with them. But what URT suggests is that we do like or feel more comfortable with somebody, even if we're not entirely relatable to them, if we understand and know who they are a little bit better, right? If you've ever watched a lot of the classic TV shows that have those like will they, won't they relationships, or relationships that develop between characters over time, right? The Office between Jim and Pam is a really good example of this type of relationship. Oftentimes, a lot of these characters have some initial feelings or interest, but it's through the familiarity and friendships and relationships they form by being forced to do things together for a very long time that those emotions start to develop, right? A lot of relationships will develop over that longer period of interaction, especially when people might joke and say, when I first met you, I didn't really like you very much, but that changed, right? So how we choose to share verbally is one part of it. We choose to share more about ourselves, of course, and disclose more, we're more comfortable. Nonverbal warmth is another one. Again, we don't oftentimes think about our nonverbal communication, the way that we gesture, how often we gesture, how physically close and our proxemics to that person. But those things are oftentimes used in how we choose to communicate and share our numbers with other people. If you're with a close friend, right, maybe you're sitting on the couch right next to them. But if you just met somebody, maybe you're on the entirely other side of the couch, because being too physically close to them at that stage would be weird. Obviously, COVID has made things strange with regards to nonverbal communication too. But nonverbal communication is a big part of that. Self-disclosure is how much we choose to share about ourselves to other people, right? Oftentimes we're navigating the terrain of what we think is the appropriate amount to share or to talk about with other people. A good example of this is if you've seen the memed to death film Shrek, right? There's himself to an onion, he says, I have layers, right? People think I'm this big scary ogre, but there's more to it. In the same way, we choose to disclose and share more about who we are as people as we have greater comfort. Similarity, what we have in common with somebody else, of course, matters too. Similarity is an easy way to make good friendships. And then liking. Do we like the other person? Do we think they're fun to be around? Do we enjoy their company? Or are they grating or annoying? Right? Those are the things that we oftentimes experience in relationships. So URT is what is known as axiomatic. So the core of this theory, and the way you would consider using this theory if you incorporate it for one of your application papers to the course, is to break it down into its 7 major axioms or laws, right? Again, this is a very empirical, hard science, data-oriented theory. And so it suggests and predicts a lot of relationships of how we choose to communicate with others. So I'm going to go over each of these axioms, and I want you to keep these in mind, because I'll be asking you to return to your attendance activity a bit later to apply a couple of these axioms to your own conversation at the beginning of class. So let's start first with axiom number 1. This is a really straightforward one. As verbal communication increases, uncertainty decreases, right? That is, as we talk more and more, we have more conversations with people, we're less uncertain of who that person is. If, for instance, you're part of a club or you have some coworkers that you talk to, the more and more you talk to them, the more and more comfortable and safe and familiar you feel with those people. That's why catfishing is oftentimes effective, because people chat for months and months and months and really become completely convinced that the person is who they claim to be. The second axiom gets at nonverbal communication, as we brought up earlier, right? As nonverbal affiliative expressiveness increases, uncertainty decreases. Nonverbal affiliative expressiveness would mean nonverbal, right? So our use of things like gestures, tone of voice, physical distancing. Affiliative expressiveness is how we associate our nonverbal with our verbal communication. In other words, right, we tend to use more and more open nonverbal communication with people we are more trusting of. So we might be more close to them physically. We might use more physical contact, like tapping them on the shoulder or shaking their hand. In a romantic relationship, of course, how we might choose to express and share, like giving somebody a kiss would be an example of the use of that expressiveness non-verbally as well. We also express more non-verbally when we have less uncertainty, right? Typically, when you're meeting somebody for the first time, there's some distance. You're oftentimes a little bit more monotone in your speaking style. You don't gesture super dynamically, but you do that a lot more once you feel that comfort with somebody else, right? It's like kind of opening the gates of your level of comfort and physicality with that person. Again, we as human beings like to gather data. We like to receive information that helps us make judgments and evaluations in our lives. In this way, the more uncertain we are of people, who they are, the more we're going to try to gather data and material, right? And vice versa. If we feel really comfortable and safe with other people, we're less inclined to try to figure out sort of the core things to know if that person is safe or not. Again, with behavior online, including catfishing and related scams, oftentimes we are skeptical at first. And a lot of scammers have a very detailed vocabulary for justifying or explaining some of the things that seem a little bit fishy, right? For instance, I got a spam call this morning from somebody that claimed that they were from the Publishers Clearinghouse and said that they had $1 million for me and asked me if I was home. And, you know, you get like those weird calls all the time, get people asking about your car's extended warranty and all of that stuff, right? But oftentimes they come in with scripts so that they're prepared to answer your information seeking questions. Who am I talking to? What's your name? How are you going to deliver this money? What is the Publishers Clearinghouse, right? Scammers are oftentimes prepared to address information seeking behavior. Axiom 4. This one's pretty straightforward too. That is, we feel less intimacy with other people if we feel more uncertainty with them, right? Oftentimes the relationships, including romantic relationships, will kind of ebb and flow in our understanding of and trust in other people. That is, when we have lower uncertainty, we have higher intimacy. As our walls come down and we feel safe and more comfortable with that person, right? We're more willing to be close, whether it's in a friendship context, a romantic context, and so on. I feel like in just about like every rom-com, right? There's the moment where the characters are coming together and then they have this break or moment that brings them apart, and you notice it because it affiliates itself with uncertainty in the relationship. I started, for example, the other day, I started watching Bridgerton on Netflix, right? And some silly examples here of that in action too, right? Where the characters get closer, but then suddenly one of the characters is really callous and detached and they're confused. I thought we were getting closer and getting together, right? So that level of uncertainty plays out in a lot of the relationships we see. Number 5 is this idea of reciprocity. This is, I think, the trickiest of the 7. Reciprocity deals with a back and forth or equality in the size of the relationship. There's a good chance with people you didn't know well for this class that there was a lot of reciprocity. That is, you were asking a question, like, what are some of your hobbies? Okay, well, what are some of yours? Like, and it was a very kind of seesaw back and forth style of conversation. Oftentimes with people we don't know very well, we're following a script. We're trying to make the communication very one-to-one with that other person. How are you doing today? I'm good. How are you? And oftentimes it can be awkward. But if we think about our best friends, there's a good chance that people that we know really well have created space for more one-sided relationships. For instance, there might be a time where you just had a really tough exam and you just want to vent and talk about it and talk to your friend for a while, and they're there to listen. And vice versa, maybe they got out of a difficult relationship and they really want to spend a lot of time talking about that. As we feel less uncertainty and greater safety, we're more comfortable with less reciprocity or of our conversations with the person being more one-sided. They tend to be more one-sided when we don't know the other person. Number 6 is birds of a feather flock together, right? It's the idea that when we feel similarities between people in a group, that we have less uncertainty and vice versa, right? You discover that both of you are athletes. As a result, you feel that similarity, you feel less uncertainty, you get to know a few things about that other person and learn a little bit about what makes them tick, right? Similarities are helpful because they're a shortcut. We can ascribe a lot of relatable experiences to that person. For instance, somebody says, okay, I was a debater in high school too. I get that a lot, where I talk about doing debate, being involved in that. And I talk to people who use that and say, oh, I was doing that. And that's a conversation starter a lot, where people talk about similar experiences in their lives. Or I grew up in Eastern Washington too, right? Examples like that oftentimes help us with our comfort. The final axiom is about liking, right? And it's the idea that we don't like people as much that we feel uncertain about. Again, it's about putting up walls. It's about our fears, our anxieties, and so on, and the way that they play out in our relationships. In fact, I had a colleague whose main question in his research was, how do people use the like on things like Facebook and other forms of social media to flirt and indicate their interest in somebody else? Because oftentimes people who might choose to like social media, however you choose to use it, are oftentimes people that do like you more or are interested in expressing that interest in somebody else. In addition to these 7 axioms, it's useful to think about some of the things that also can color our experiences with other people. If somebody else can reward or punish us, for example, communication with the boss, we oftentimes have an additional incentive to seek out information and to get to know the boss, right? We might, for instance, try to butter them up or compliment them and talk about their interests, given that power relationship. If somebody is behaving in ways that we don't expect, like maybe we're getting to know a friend and all of a sudden they seem really angry, we might try to figure out what's going on. So it's not just as simple, oh, we're becoming closer, uncertainty is going down, right? Sometimes we're reacting to a sudden change. And whether or not we expect future interactions with a person is important too, right? We're less motivated to reduce uncertainty and build relationships if we're talking to a random stranger that we're never going to meet again. In fact, that's why we see a lot of things like road rage or a lot more hostility or detachment, or you scroll down to the comments section of the internet and it's people who know they're not going to see each other again, right? They're more willing to act cold, knowing that there's less at stake. When it comes to some of the ways that we reduce uncertainty, we can take on a passive approach, right? Where we're just this kind of observer who's learning a little bit about somebody. There's a good chance that maybe for friends or teammates or somebody that you're getting to know or dating, you probably social media stalk them just a little bit, right? Oftentimes we use that as a way to get to know and figure out the terrain of that person. We might do active efforts to try to understand who that person is, right? And really ask, for instance, like the silly thing in middle school where you tried to get your friend to ask if somebody liked you, right? Active efforts are trying to figure that out. And then interactive might involve direct communication, right? Where we're actually talking with the person to get to know that person better, right? For instance, I'm interviewing people who are applying for jobs at EOU, and I was kind of shocked because one of the candidates started listing out what I do in a way I was like, I don't know this person, but they seem to know me, right? And so they were trying to do that as a strategy of reducing uncertainty. So we observe behavior of other people and use that to navigate the terrain. So URT has some critiques, right? Again, each theory in this class has some pushback. This is a theory that's used a lot. Talked about a lot in classes like interpersonal communication. In fact, if you've taken the class, it's a good chance that you have heard this theory before. Some of the critiques include the idea that reducing uncertainty is not necessarily the main goal of communication, especially if we're talking to people that we don't intend to speak with again. Our goal is not necessarily to get to know who that person is. Sometimes we just don't care, right? Or sometimes we like the idea that there's an air of mystery surrounding somebody else. For instance, maybe we like creating emotional boundaries or limits in some of our relationships or closing off some of our relationships because we don't want to go past a certain point or share information with that person that is beyond what we're comfortable with. Also, right, one critique is that sometimes wanting knowledge rather than lacking knowledge can motivate more. It's not necessarily that we don't know about this person, but that we want to know about somebody. If there's somebody, for instance, like a friend that you really like and really want to have a good relationship with, maybe you already have some pieces of information, but you want to learn more. You want to hear more about their story and their life experience, even though compared to other strangers, you have more information on average. And then lastly, right, you can kind of think about it like chains, right, the weakest link. The idea that if one of these axioms is incorrect, the other can kind of fall apart. That is, for instance, if we assume that people are actually less likely to communicate verbally as they're less uncertain, then the other axioms don't make sense either. For instance, if people are close, sometimes they're just comfortable being alone together, right? They're comfortable like just doing their own thing, being on their phones, browsing the internet, and so on, but don't necessarily communicate verbally more, which sort of throws a big wrench at the entire theory. So it's a good theory, but I think these critiques are still valid and worth thinking about when we're placing this overall. So I want to show you a short trailer from one of the seasons of Catfish, the TV show, because again, I think it does a good job of showing URT in action, both in terms of the decision to meet these people face to face, who they originally met online, and also some of the ways that URT is at play in the decisions that we make through the use of social media too. So as you're watching the trailer, pay attention to how URT is at play in describing the comfort that people are expressing over the course of the relationship.
Hi, Neve. I need help in meeting my fiance, Steven.
Wait, I need help in meeting my fiance.
Yeah, my name is Lauren. I met the love of my life online 8 years ago and have yet to meet him face to face.
8 years ago.
He is literally like the perfect guy for me.
We haven't been able to find him or music by him anywhere. He isn't who he says he is.
And we missed something.
I feel like we're definitely getting closer.
Whoa.
We got him.
What else have you done?
I gave him my bank information.
What?
Yeah. Have you ever just sent her money? Yeah. How much? 1,000, maybe. Jesus, man.
How did this man last about everything? He's always laughing at me. I'm so tired of it.
I'm the Derek's driveway. What am I doing?
Man, what are you doing? Like, we need Timbuktu. You don't think this girl has been using you? No, I don't think so.
Wow, catfish curveball.
I'm not going to sleep well tonight.
And I don't know.
I have a lot to say to you. Yeah, I want to see for myself what the truth is.
I'm sorry, over the course of this class, there are just going to be too many examples from bad reality TV. There are some of these theories because they just like capture so much about the worst aspects of our communication, right? But some of the stuff about, like, for instance, I can't believe they lied to me because it went against the expectations of the relationship. I can't believe I'm in this driveway. We're engaged, but we haven't met in real life, right? There's these aspects of reducing uncertainty. You also have the guys on the show who are trying to figure out and discover who the person really is. So there's a lot at play here in showing these steps of the theory in action and some of the ways that a relationship might reduce uncertainty while still not necessarily being entirely honest. So what I want you to do is to come back to the attendance activity that you worked on at the beginning of class. And I'd like you to think about a couple of the axioms that we talked about related to URT. And just in a couple minutes, take some time to think about how they might connect to your conversation. So I went ahead and posted all 7 of those axioms that we talked about earlier. Choose just 2 of them that you think might be relevant and might explain some of the ways that you talked to another person in class earlier. For instance, maybe because you didn't know them very well, you sought out a lot of information about who they were and some of their interests. Yeah. You have a couple more minutes to think about this. Looks like most of you are wrapping up. So just to cap off the things that we've talked about for today, right? URT is about how we choose to communicate. It suggests we communicate to make our relationships more predictable and to reduce the uncertainty that we encounter day to day. It has those 7 axioms or laws that are explaining why it is that we reduce uncertainty in our relationships. And also, right, there's critique about what motivates us to get to know and share. It's not always about reducing uncertainty in every situation. For Friday, we'll be talking about social exchange theory, the idea of viewing our relationships as like monetary transactions. So there'll be some interesting debate and critique there related to that theory. Once you've wrapped up, feel free to pass forward or type and email me your attendance for today. Have a great rest of your afternoon, and I'll see you again for Friday's class.